G'day, welcome to Torah Tuesday. Today we'll be looking at Exodus 6 and 7. Even though last week we did look at Exodus 5 and 6, I realized that there was a typo in the PDF document, and you were instructed to read Exodus 2 twice, which means that I've been a bit ahead of the readings. Anyway, to stop the hassle, I've just decided to play along with the PDF document. So today we're looking at Exodus 6 and 7. Now, a quick recap of what's happened so far in the Exodus. God has seen the oppression of the Hebrew people in slavery, and he will act to bring an end to it. God has called Moses to be the one who will lead them out of slavery, even though Moses is seemingly unwilling. God reveals his name, his personal name to Moses, Yahweh, and he says that he will succeed because God wants his name to be associated with the liberation of these people from slavery. So God is doing it for the sake of his own reputation. He will succeed for that reason. So Moses goes down to Egypt with his brother Aaron, and they tell the Israelite leaders what's going to happen and what's intended, and they all yell hooray and fall down and worship, and then they go to Pharaoh, and Moses tells Pharaoh to let God's people go, so that they can go to Mount Sinai and worship, which means serve, God. And Pharaoh responds, "Who is the Lord that I should obey him? Who is Yahweh that I should obey him and let the Israelites go?" He says, "I do not know Yahweh, and I will not let Israel go." And then he puts some extra work on the Israelite slaves. He says they will not worship and serve Yahweh, they will serve me, because remember, worship and serve are the same word, same concept. And so Moses goes back to God and he says, "God, it's only gotten worse, it hasn't gotten better since I've spoken to Pharaoh." And then God responds with this long speech in chapter 6 from verse 1 to 8. It's a really important part of the Exodus story. He says, "Now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. Because of my mighty hand, he will let the people go. Because of my mighty hand, he will drive them out of his own country." And then he tells Moses to tell the Israelites, "I will free you from being slaves to the Egyptians, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with mighty acts of judgment." And so we get a bit of a window here into what is about to happen in the story. This is talking about the upcoming acts of judgment that God is going to bring on Egypt, what we call the plagues. So they go to Pharaoh and they do this thing with the snakes. Remember, Aaron throws his staff down and turns into a snake. Pharaoh's magicians throw their staffs down and they also turn into snakes. Whether this is magic or actual witchcraft, who knows? But it could be either. But Aaron's staff swallows up the snakes, and then it says, "Pharaoh's heart became hard, and he would not listen to them, just as Yahweh had said." Now we're going to pause here today, and we're going to look at all of the plagues together next week. But there's two questions that I think we should talk about. Firstly, what is the deal with Pharaoh's hard heart? And then the second one is, why does God act in these 10 plagues? So what's the deal with Pharaoh's hard heart? Okay, it's a big question. We first heard about Pharaoh's heart, his resistance to God, in chapter 3. And then over the coming 4 chapters, this whole episode with the plagues, we're going to hear about it a lot. Pharaoh's heart, sometimes we are told that God hardened Pharaoh's heart. Sometimes we're told that Pharaoh's hardens his own heart. And then other times we're told that Pharaoh's heart was hard, just the passive, no one's responsible there. So what does this all mean? Well, this is definitely a big one, and it's dealing with questions about the sovereignty of God and the freedom of people to choose for themselves, free will. But I think the most important thing to notice in this story, and remember, we are reading a story, it has to kind of have plot and tension and drive. We need to know that Pharaoh does harden his own heart. That is something that definitely happens in the story. It's actually the first way that it's spoken about is God mentions that Pharaoh will resist what Moses is bringing. So Pharaoh does harden his own heart. Now the tricky thing is that it also tells us that God hardens his heart. They both happen. But ultimately God is able to bring about his plan to redeem Israel through the evil choices of Pharaoh. Through the hard heart of Pharaoh, God is going to bring about his plan. So if the question is who is in control, the answer is clearly God. But then you might also ask, yes, but does Pharaoh harden his own heart? And the answer is also yes. It's a mystery. It's the way the story is. It's the way the Bible is. But I think that that's the best way to think about Pharaoh's hard heart. Now the second question, why are there 10 plagues? We're going to look at all the plagues next week, like I said. It's a well-known story. It's a strange story. Why are there 10 plagues or 10 strikes, as is probably the more literal translation of the term? I think it boils down to a few things. Firstly, as we've just read, they are judgment on the oppression of Egypt and Pharaoh. These are mighty acts of judgment, God calls them when he speaks to Moses. Because this is a part of what God wants his name to be associated with. In chapter 6, verse 5, he says, "And the Egyptians will know that I am Yahweh when I stretch out my hand against Egypt and bring the Israelites out of it." So 7 times in this plagues episode, God will say, "And you will know that I am Yahweh." God wants his name to be associated with remembering Israel. He wants it to be associated with the way that he redeems them from oppression and delivers them into the promised land. But he also wants his name to be associated with the punishing of wickedness. At the end of Exodus, God will speak to Moses. This is the episode where he passes in front of him, and he will boil down his character to this. You've probably heard this before. It's Exodus 34, 6 and 7. "Yahweh, Yahweh, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and evil. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children and their children for the sin of the parents to the 3rd and 4th generation." God wants his name to be associated with punishing wickedness. So these 10 strikes, as we'll talk about next week, they're all acts of decreation. It's kind of a funny word, but I don't mean destruction, I do mean decreation, because God is demonstrating in these plagues that he is the creator God. He is Yahweh, the one who always was. And since he is the creator God, he can also decreate. We'll see in these plagues that that's actually what he's doing in these plagues. He's decreating, and he's showing himself to be the true and living God over and against all of the gods of Egypt. Now let's wrap up. Does the God you know judge evil? Does the God you know judge evil? We all want evil to be undone until we realize that we are also the doers of evil. So this desire for justice, it actually aims its target at us eventually. We are unjust and we deserve to be punished. And that's why the cross of Christ is so wonderful, because at the cross of Christ, God's justice and his love meet head on. And so Jesus takes the punishment that we deserve in a demonstration of love for us. When we read about the plagues, we read about God's justice, and it's good. But God is slow to anger. He's abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. Have a good day.